I think I am saying it right. Modine Advanced Thermal Systems. As a certified IATF 16949 auditor, Jennifer has supported the certification and management process for production within automotive industry. Currently, she is using certifications in ISO SAE 21434, cybersecurity, and ISO 26262 for functional safety of road vehicles to manage Modine's implementation of these standards for automotive parts with embedded software. As a public speaker, author, former adjunct instructor, I should say probably world traveler, just from our earlier discussion here. Well, it sounds like a lot of it has been for work, which she's been pretty lucky, it sounds like. And she is passionate about education and inspiring quality professionals, which is why we're glad that she's here. She's based in Milwaukee, near the home of ASQ, and she enjoys spending her free time hiking with her Australian Shepherd and reading mystery novels. So tonight's topic, Demystifying Internal Audits, will focus on internal auditing from developing the program to tips and tricks throughout implementation and management. Whether you're required to conduct internal audits due to compliance to a standard, or if you're just awaiting or wanting to support continuous improvement, we'll discuss the benefits and dive into scheduling, principles, auditor competency, process, reporting, and more. So, um, yeah, thank you again, Jennifer. It's been a good dialogue here in the early part. And if you guys don't know, she is also volunteered to present in Milwaukee, which is not Milwaukee, in November. She is in Milwaukee, and sorry, and she is going to present during the quality month on a more of a quality oriented topic. So we get the treat of this will be the part one, and then we'll have a brief break, and we'll have Jennifer again in November. So without further ado, take it away, Jennifer.
All right, I'm going to share my screen, and it's going to be this one. Let me know if you guys see it. Do you see it now?
There
Maybe
was
not.
something just presenting, and then I think when you just went to present, it disappeared on mine. Let me see.
Okay,
I close my PowerPoint.
there we go. This should do it, right?
There we go. Now it's working.
Yep,
Okay, cool.
perfect.
Well, thank you guys so much for the opportunity to be here. One of my favorite topics, so I'm super excited. And then November is one of my favorite months, by the way, for World Quality. Always do a lot there. If you guys don't mind, I'm going to keep the presentation in this view because I'm going to share some examples with you guys as I go through. So I'll just kind of flip things around, and this will just be easier than presentation mode. All right, so to get started, and thank you for the introduction. Also, tonight we are going to be talking about the journey and demystifying. Oh my goodness, I'm starting off terrible. Demystifying internal audits. And did a good job here. So we're going to talk about a lot of general information, setting up your program, going over what the audit process includes, a little bit about audit reporting, and just some general tips from my experience. All right, so when we talk about audits, I wanted to focus on kind of two types of audits here just because of the time we had. I knew there was a lot of interest in the layered process audits, so I'm going to incorporate some of that. And then general like internal process audits. Difference being with process audits, we're focusing on what the inputs are, what's happening, and then the outputs within the organization. So we'll talk a little bit about your process map, and how to schedule and get auditors for those types of activities. And then we're going to talk about what layered process audits are and kind of the differences. I've embedded the information within each topic for both. So with layered process audits, we really are focusing on core processes. And what's unique about them is they're in different layers. So it provides a lot of different insight depending on how you do your program. Layer one is generally going to be your operators and your frontline workers do those. I'm going to be sharing some information there related to ours in terms of KPIs and other. We do those, I'm going to use some Modine examples only because I've recently developed this program for them. So it's top of mind for me. Layer two is supervisors, managers, really. And for us, we do these monthly. So we'll hit every We hit the assembly lines, warehouse, and the shipping dock are areas that we've determined. Layer 3 might go to an additional level of management if you want. And layer 4 is generally directors and executives. They might do these quarterly. It is not mandated of when you do them or what you hit with them. I am going to give you some references. I follow the AIAG CQI for layered process audits. AIAG is the Automotive Industry Action Group. And I'll give you guys that information on the last slide. But of course, we know there are other types of audits. If we had a long time, I'd love to talk about those too. But QMS, for example, I applied that recently. We needed IATF 16949 certification for our plant in Tennessee because we work with an IATF member, Volvo. So we were required to have that certification. So I did a gap assessment of the whole system to the standard. So that was an audit of really the whole system, not just individual processes that we'll be talking about tonight. You can do supplier audits. You can either do a qualification audit, you could do a development audit for suppliers, product audits, which are mentioned in the IATF standard, as well as 9001. You can do safety types of audits, and you can do external. Either if you want to be certified, you'd have a registrar work with you, or there are consulting companies that can come in and do gap assessments for you if you're looking to be certified. Or even, for example, I mentioned, or it was mentioned that I'm doing the functional safety and cybersecurity. The company that we're working with that wants that compliance has us doing an external audit related to those two standards to have a third party assess where we're at. So all types of audits that we can do. And I think a lot of this would be applicable to any of them. But again, main focus being our process audits and our layered process audits. And let me know if there are questions. I don't see them on this screen with sharing this, but just let me know. And I know there's time for questions afterwards. So I am happy to answer any of those for you guys. All right, so why do we even conduct audits, right? The most general benefits include, it gives us some insights into our processes. And I think when I show you in a little bit, I'll show you an example of one of our turtle diagrams and how we look at processes. And then I'll show you an example internal audit report, which really dives into, it's an opportunity to really have kind of that outside perspective evaluation of the process. But what's really cool is even if you're auditing, the process owner that you're auditing gets a lot of insight and thinks about things maybe in different ways as well. So they might get ideas for themselves on process improvement. Identifying inefficiencies and issues, enhancing efficiency, of course, fostering continuous improvement, being risk-based and focusing on continuous improvement is at the cornerstone of most of your ISO standards for QMS. And then it does promote a culture of quality across the organization because it gets everyone talking about it, especially when we talk about auditor competency. I've done some unique things with cross-training there and connecting it with personal development and goals. So you get people who might not necessarily be in quality or be an auditor, but you get them engaged in quality. And then everyone's thinking, of course, we know Deming, right? Quality is everyone's responsibility. And then specific to layered process audits, right? Because we really are digging into those core processes there. Some additional benefits I wanted to mention, and these actually do come right from the CQI, but mitigate safety incidences. For example, on our layered process 1 and 3 audit reports, we do have a check for safety there. For example, is there stuff in the middle of the line, or is there stuff in the warehouse out in the middle of forklift danger? One time in a recent report, we had there was a cord from one of our end-of-line testers going across the floor, and that was a trip hazard. So we were able to mitigate that. Reducing waste, improving product quality, of course, and customer satisfaction because we're meeting or exceeding customer expectations. Reducing quality incidences, measuring and encouraging our work process standardization, which I love. Reinforcing key or updated process steps, increasing interactions between management and operators. This is particularly really interesting because it does you saw your layer 3 and your layer 4. You might have people that are not on the line all the time. Maybe if you don't have Gemba or other, It gets them out there talking to operators, and that has a benefit to both management and the operators. And then allowing for firsthand feedback. So it does give them an opportunity to provide feedback that they otherwise might not have a channel to do so. And then it reduces the overall cost of poor quality. And I can tell you that one for sure. I implemented our layered process audit program almost a year ago. And I would say our cost of poor quality has been directly impacted. That is one of our overall quality KPIs. All right, so we're going to get into the meat of it in a second, but I want to go over the principles. So I did reference this standard at the end as well, but it is the ISO standard for guidelines to audit management. So it's its own standard, and it basically tells you a lot of how to set it up, or gives you tips on auditor competencies, some of the things that we're talking about tonight. But you've got 7. So there are 7 identified. You've got, and I love these actually. I have a sign printed up in our department for this one, but integrity. So you want to work honestly, diligently, and responsibly. The key really being, for the auditor perspective, unbiased, right? You got to go in, you can't have any biases. Fair presentation, you're going to report truthfully and accurately. Do professional care, exercising care and competency. So really the idea is to take the skills that you're going to be trained to do as an auditor and apply those to the process. Confidentiality is very important, especially if, well, and I'll mention it later, but especially, for example, in the confirmation, even as a small thing, confirmation of who's going to get your audit report, right? You don't want to just think, oh, everyone needs to have this audit report. We want to make sure we're identifying in advance who's supposed to receive the information, just in case there's confidential information. Independent and confidentiality is interesting too, as a side note, for external auditors. So they'll often ask, or you'll often be very careful with taking photos or videos, or for example, when we have auditors in, we won't allow them to see our PFEMAs or our control plans, or take pictures or copies of them rather. They can view them, but they're not allowed to take them. Independence, auditors do need to remain independent and objective. And I put free from conflicts of interest. So like, for example, you don't want to have financial interest in the organization that you're auditing. Also something interesting in a tip later, but you shouldn't be auditing a process that's owned by your manager, right? So that actually came up in our 9001 audit last year, because we were auditing and the process owner happened to be someone's boss, and that was a no-no. Evidence-based approach. So your conclusions really need to be have verifiable evidence and data, and you're going to detail that in the report, and also align with the people that you're auditing, so there's no surprises. But you want to, if you're going against a standard, you need to make sure of what that non-compliance is and report it with verifiable evidence and data. And then we know 9001 for anyone who's worked with that, or IATF 16949, which is really a supplement to 9001 for the automotive industry. We got to have risk-based thinking. So we need to consider our risk when we're planning and conducting audits. And then I added this here, but by adhering to these principles, auditors like ourselves can effectively contribute to the overall effectiveness and credibility of the audit process, providing valuable insights and support to our organizations. All right, so the meat of it. We're setting up a program, right? We don't have one, we need one. So first you got to kind of think about backing up before I even get into any of this. Are you trying to set up a program that has standards requirements? For example, are you going to get ISO 9001, or are you ISO 9001? If you're automotive, I keep using IATF. If you're a medical device, you might be 13489, whatever it is, or if it's none. But you do need to consider the requirements above and beyond what I've listed here. And how I've organized this is, so each of these points here, I'll have additional slides as we go through. So consider this just kind of a main slide, really kind of as we get into the more details of each of these topics. So for setting up an audit program, first we have to review and confirm our applicable processes, right? We want to develop a process map and the associated inputs and outputs of each. As we go forward, I'm going to share my process map with you to kind of show you how I manage that. And I'll show you an example of a turtle diagram that's actually for the internal process of internal audits. So we want to consider a standards cross-reference matrix. For IATF, that's required, but I'm going to show you what I've got for 9001 and IATF because our corporate is 9001 and our manufacturing plant is IATF. A corporate office cannot be IATF. It has to be manufacturing. For layered process audits, you want to consider your areas. I mentioned to you guys, for us, we set it up as our lines. So we have each assembly line as an area, and then we have warehouse as an area, and then we have our shipping dock as an area. So each one of those, and I'll show you how I work it with scheduling, but you'll have people assigned to audit that area at the cadence that you determine. I already mentioned you considering compliance requirements when you create the schedule, and I use the example for it of IATF. We are required to audit every process at least every 3 years, but I'm going to show you how you can do it risk-based to determine whether you want to do it every year, every 2 years, or every 3 years. And that's a good general standard for even if you're not compliance, right? You don't want to go that long without having a process looked at. For your layered process audits, you do want to consider your resources as well. And I'll get into that, but that can be tricky because, for example, I mentioned our layer 1 audits are done weekly. So every one of those areas is audited every week. So I need to make sure not to overload people because I do use cross-functional resources that I train to do that, really, so they can give an objective look at it. But you've got to make sure you've got to consider that when you're doing your schedule. And then developing your controlled audit checklist. I say controlled because you want to have your audit process work instruction, and you want to have any of the templates you use as controlled documents. So all of us here in quality, I know we've got a solid document management and control system. So those would be included in that. You want to develop your risk assessment criteria. And in subsequent slides, I'll show you what mine is for Modine. Document your audit process. That's that work instruction I told you about. Document your process. You got to have your goals and your KPIs. And ideally, so that's just for these two, but when you're auditing, the key is that every process should have at least one KPI that shows the effectiveness of that process. So during the audit, you want to ask them what the KPI is, or if they have a turtle diagram, it'll be great because it's in there. And then you want to look at that trend. And then kind of you can dig further into that when you see it. Decide how your results are going to be communicated and to whom. That goes with that confidentiality piece. That's pretty important. And then you want to build your audit team. So we want to make sure that individuals conducting audits have the appropriate training. We'll go into a little bit of that as well. Absolutely make sure that you maintain training records, whether you're certified or not. It's just good practice. And then think that training can be internal or external. And we'll talk about some different options there. So, as I promised, we will go into each one in more detail. All right, so for us to do internal audits of process, we need to know what our processes are. So we want to consider the relationships of each process and indicate that in the process map. I'm going to share with you that I did get hit with an IATF minor nonconformance related to this. This one was approved. This was my corrective action, but I had not effectively put in the relationships here. We have a very interesting dynamic in the sense that corporate is here in Racine, in Wisconsin, but then we have a plant within a plant. So you have 2 verticals in one plant, and some of them have shared processes. So it gets kind of interesting in that sense. But this one was approved, and I'll show you the write-out. This is just the visual of that. And I did mention a turtle diagram that I'm going to share with you, but those are just, I can't speak highly enough about turtle diagrams because as an auditor, if they've got a turtle diagram, you have everything you need to do that audit. And it's good for them to know too, because they need to know their process. And then we have to make sure each process has an owner. And I already mentioned it needs to have a KPI that demonstrates the effectiveness of that process. And then if standards requirements are necessary, I mentioned a matrix to demonstrate how your processes relate to the specific clauses. So I know that's a lot. Let me share just a few examples with you guys. Which I have right here. All right, so this is our turtle diagram. So we have one of these for each of our processes. So and this is a lot. Sometimes with a turtle diagram, you're just going to see this part here. But we've added a lot of additional detail here, and auditors love it. But it really just kind of says, if you get this as an auditor in advance, you really exactly know, hey, I'm looking at these documents. This is how they're following the process. I feel confident here that they know what their risks are, what their opportunities are. Hey, all these standards apply to them. So we need to make sure that we're hitting on any applicable clauses within these standards that would apply. And we know that from an internal perspective, I think I mentioned, but all of these documents would apply. So if I was doing this audit, I didn't put anything about timing in here, but I'll tell you, this would take about an hour and a half. If you're prepared. So auditing this process with this information would take about an hour and a half, and you're going to have the process owner and any other interested parties that would want to attend. I can share that again with questions, but I just want to make sure that I'm getting through the information. So, oh, and I wanted to show you too, the other thing is the full process map, which is, I know I'm switching around, but I know that when I do this, when I get this stuff, I like examples. So hold up. That is coming. Oh, I got it right here. I'm sorry. It's actually the Zoom thing. Okay. Here we go. So this is I showed you the visual, but this is really kind of what it looks like here. So I have each process. I know that I'm IATF, and I know that I'm covered with 9001 because IATF is a topper on that. So I've referenced the IATF clauses. Some of them might be overlapping with 9001. I've got all my documents. Now this wouldn't be all the documents. We have reference documents within these, right? So that's an auditor rabbit hole in itself, but the process owner, what is our KPI that's associated with that? And then I told you guys I got hit on this location information here. So I got real specific, and the auditor actually loved it when she went back for the corrective actions. So, and then when I do my audit report, it's super easy when I've got this, because I know that, hey, if I'm going to audit supply chain management, I got to cover all this. And I know who the people are that I need to do, because I know who's working on these things, and I need to make sure to incorporate the process owner. And then I did my matrix like this, but this is good even if it isn't required for you, but it helps you on if you let a lot of people, and I've created quality management systems for organizations, they don't want certification, but they do need a quality management system to as a supplier requirement for their customers, or it's just good practice. So they will model ISO 9001. So in doing that, it kind of helps you to say, hey, here are my processes. Here's the different elements of my standard that I want to follow or model. And I'm making sure I'm hitting on all the areas through my processes. I haven't missed anything. This is required for ITF, but it is just general practice. And then this here is IATF is unique with customer specific requirements that are issued. So we list those out separately. Hopefully we've got some automotive people in here. Okay, going back. So you've got your processes all tidy and good. And generally you want to kind of just review these too. If you guys are doing management reviews, I don't know what your cadence would be. They general practice, they say at least once a year. We do ours biannually. It's not dictated of the amount as long as you cover the information. But we'll review once in the biannual at least to look at the processes. All right, so scheduling, there's a lot to consider here. I mentioned chain of command. That was that reference to you don't want to have an auditor assigned to audit someone who the process owner is their boss. But you got to think about frequency, shifts. For example, if you're doing assembly or some other type of manufacturing line and you've got 2 or 3 shifts, you're going to want to make sure to hit all the shifts. Your risk criteria, which I'm going to go over here, compliance requirements, the resources that you have available to do the audits, communications, and then auditor availability. That's a big one. So I've listed my schedule here. This is just an example of my layered process audit 1, which is kind of, that's the weekly one. So I just assign people, these are our assembly lines that you see, and then you've got the shipping dock warehouse listing the week, and I'll send this out 2 weeks in advance, and we have it printed out on the floor as well. But these individuals, when we talk about auditor competency, they have to sign off on training, so they have to do one, shadow one. But these people could be purchasing, they could come from not necessarily the line or quality. They could be manufacturing, engineering, customer service rep would be April. So yeah, you got a number of people. So you got to think about who it is and then the training. And our schedule is, I told you, we do the layered process 1s daily. Each one is done once per week. Our LPA 2s, we actually use those in a little bit different of a way because of an audit finding we had, but these are actually audits of our APQP documents. So we're really going through and checking our PFEMA, our process flow, and our control plans. For that, we're doing an audit of those. And then LPA 3 is actually a copy of LPA 1, only management conducts it. So that actually gives you really interesting results, different types of findings that you see from the LPA 1s. And then we do the quarterly audits we'll have director level or above come in and do an audit of each of the areas. And then for the risk evaluation, this is mine, but I'm going to go back actually and just show you a schedule where that is listed. So my schedule looks like this. This was our last fiscal year. Our fiscal year is a little bit wonky. We go from April to March. But I've listed my processes out here. Processes did change since this calendar year, fiscal year, because I told you guys we had that finding. So I had to take another look at our processes, but most of them line up. But this is what I do for scheduling. So I'll have this out. I do it each year. I do the same one for Racine and corporate. But we just basically, what is the process? Who is the assigned auditor? What's the scope of it? When are we scheduling it? Which department does it cover? Who is my process owner? What are my standards references? What are my document references? Did they have any 8Ds? We use an 8D system, but these would be any way you track action items. So any non-conformances that you found in the previous year, you want to make sure in preparation for an upcoming audit that you're aware of them so you can investigate those and do a double take when you're doing the audit. When the report was done, how many findings were there? When was it closed? And just kind of comments that I'll add just to note, maybe it's from my registrar audit or whatever it might be. And then our risk evaluations, you probably see this better than the slide, but we use red, yellow, green. So if we are in the green, then we say, now I do every process every year, but according to this, I could pass an audit saying green actually for IATF is once every 3 years because it's low risk, right? It's got an established process, haven't had any major or minor findings in that, don't have a lot of warranty issues that I've noticed. It's a stable process. KPIs look good. When you're getting into the yellow, you're going to want to pay closer attention to that because, hey, maybe it's a new process. You haven't audited it yet. Maybe there have been some minor findings from previous audits, but nothing big. You're seeing an increase in customer or warranty claims there. Product or process with customer, if it has some special characteristics to it. And then if you're starting to see negative trends in those KPIs. And then high I will do, depending on what my issue is with it, I might go back in 6 months, but at least once a year, red would get an internal audit. So that's when, hey, it's a new process or it's not known. It was just implemented. I may have a lot of major findings from before. I got a high number of warranty claims going on. There might be something related to safety or legal requirements, and the process looks generally unstable. So depending on that, and I've color coded it this way, this particular vertical is only really yellow and red in areas because it was recently separated out as its own vertical. So a lot of our processes at the time were new and developing. Not that there were major issues, but per that criteria, they did need some further scrutiny. All right, so you got some examples there. KPIs. So you got to have your own KPIs for your audits, right? For us, for internal process audits, I want to look at the number that I've conducted on time or completed. So you saw my schedule. So I want to know how many that I haven't met per the schedule. I want to know how many are outstanding, not necessarily a KPI, but a good indicator. Number of non-conformances. So you can look at these in a number of ways. You can say, how many major do you have? Total or per area, how many minor, OFI we're going to talk about, but that's an opportunity for improvement. You can look at it by type. So how many non-conformists did you have that were related to documentation or KPI issues, or you can look at them by process. And then I do also look at open and closed corrective actions. So I want to make sure, and again, we use an 8D system, and I'm used to using some form of corrective active action system. So you want to look at how many do you have open, how many do you have closed, and you can even tag on the timeliness. For example, we try to close all of our 8Ds within total 60-day time. So how many of those are over our target dates? And for LPAs, I stole this out of the CQI that I'm going to reference later. And we do use some of these as well. But how many audits were completed, percent in conformance by area, corrective actions completed, how many of them are a repeat? This is a big one. And then KPI section 2, ignore that one. I'm going to show you our examples here for LPAs. All right, so what I do is, since it's been new, I wanna at least see 90% of them completed. So I want at least 90% of them done per the schedule. I also look at and I trend in terms of categories. So these were the areas that I mentioned to you guys, and these are the different categories that issues can go into. So I want to know what the big issues are. And right now I can tell you for warehouse, because we've seen repeat issues of the same thing and others, that we are creating an 8D just for warehouse findings. We would not create an 8D for every LPA issue noted, but when we usually try to do kind of an 80-20 thing where we're attacking the biggest one. And then we discuss that and report it out. We have monthly business reviews. And then I mentioned to you our biannual management review. We do use the AD system when discussing during our monthly business review based on trends. And I have a tracker. So I've got an issues tracker that everyone has access to. So whenever I get an LPA report and it's got an issue on it, I ensure that it's been escalated to whoever to resolve immediately. But it goes in the tracker and it stays open until I have evidence that that's been closed. And I'm super picky now too. So for example, let's say we've got an item in the warehouse that isn't properly labeled, right? It's just laying out. I don't want them to say, hey, yeah, we put a label on it. Like, I want to know why the person didn't know to put the label on it in the first place. Like, I want to see that they've trained someone, or, you know, what really was the root cause of that issue. So that is our LPA 3s. And I'm speeding up just a little bit because I know time. Auditor competency is big, especially for standards, but in general, people have to be trained. So you want to make sure your auditors have either internal or external training. I would suggest that if you have someone maybe ISO certified, or even if you're not needing to be compliant to a standard and it's just your program, at least have someone pretty seasoned that's documented. They've done a number of audits and are qualified to train others. Or I will say ASQ offers a lot of training as well, that you can do. So we do internal training. I conduct the training. And then I document that they've received the training. Not only do they have to complete my training, they have to have conducted one audit with someone else that is qualified prior to them going out on their own. So yes, making sure the trainer is qualified. You want to require auditors to observe an audit good practice prior to leading. Consider requirements for a minimum number that they conduct over a period. So for example, we say you've got to do at least one audit a year. Because I don't, it's hard to keep up and everything else if you wait and it's next year and you're like, hey, didn't you do an audit way back when? No, you want to make sure they're doing them regularly. Evaluate your standards requirements. In the IATF example, it's in 9001 too, but they're super specific about auditor competency. Ensure your trained auditors remain current with any updates to the standards or other. You want to make sure there's ongoing training, general good practice. Include competency requirements in the documentation of your process document that we talked about. So when you have your little WI for internal audits or your layered process audits, whatever it is, you want to make sure you're identifying what the auditor competency is required by your organization. And then I love doing cross-functional training for auditors. So I don't consider just people in quality because there's never enough of us, you know that. But I never consider just quality. So I like to say, hey, go to HR, go to purchasing, go to supply chain procurement, and see if anyone wants to be trained to be an auditor. They can tie it to if you have development goals. You can tie them to development goals, but also it's a pretty cool opportunity for those individuals to learn something they didn't know before. If you send someone from purchasing out on the line to audit assembly, they're going to learn a lot, and they're going to also kind of tie that into their perspective of what the organization does and what they're making for their customers. So that's good stuff. And I get a lot of positive feedback too. And occasionally someone loves it so much, they go into quality. Okay, the audit process. So confirming the audit schedule. We want to do this with enough notice. You don't want to just hit it on them, hey, you're going to get this audit next week. So you want to I give 2 months. I give them 2 months of notice. I put it in the calendar. And then within the calendar invite details, I tell them kind of specifically what I'm going to be auditing for. If I have standards clauses, I'm going to send them those so they can be as prepared as possible. You want to have an agenda and a general overview. You want your checklist in advance. What I do is I pre-populate the report or checklist, whichever one you're using. I want to pre-populate that in advance with what I know, so I'm not spending so much time trying to prepare the report while I'm auditing. You want to make sure that if there were previous audits, you want to look at those reports. You're going to execute the audit, and that includes, you're going to observe. You might do some interviews. You're going to look at their KPIs. Can't drill this enough, but you really want to see those KPIs demonstrate the effectiveness of the process. You're going to record the audit findings and be detailed, discuss those findings and follow-up actions as applicable with all interested parties. And you're going to schedule a follow-up as needed. And I did make a note in terms of layered process audits, you're not going to require advance notice. The schedule's out. They're just going to pop in and do that when they can. And I'll go through kind of each one of these just very briefly, or some of it rather. So for your findings, you can have a major nonconformance. That's a critical issue, a systemic issue. You can have a minor nonconformance. That's going to require a correction of some sort, but it's not systemic. It may be like a one-off kind of thing. You're not seeing it repeat, and it's not affecting, you don't think it's going to affect ultimate customer quality of what's going out. An observation, we don't necessarily use observations, but you certainly can. It's an audit note identifying areas for improvement without marking a non-compliance, which I've always felt is similar to an OFI, which I've always used. which is a suggestion for improvement to enhance process performance or compliance. So once you get to auditing, you get all this knowledge of, you know, how maybe benchmarking for others or what you've seen. So you can kind of share that, or your own experience that you've had in your career. You can share that as an opportunity for improvement, and it helps both parties. Then for your LPAs, you're not going to necessarily have findings, what we do, because it's real quick, right? It's just, they're even just printing it out. We scan those in, but we're like, hey, are these good, not good? Did they correct it while you're there, or that's not applicable? Reporting tips for you: give as much detail as possible, right? Because that next auditor is going to look at your report and want some historic information. Don't add anything to reports that you didn't discuss with interested parties in the audit. No surprises. Document those applicable action items and discuss dates if that's applicable. Check reports. Oh, this is one thing, because I am pedantic about grammar, but check your reports for grammar, spelling, right? Make sure you have the right dates, ensure you can, and then ensure you know who should be receiving the report. And then distribute the reports in a timely manner. This is a pet peeve of mine too. Don't wait like a week to send your report. It's fresh on your mind. Do the report while it's fresh and get it out for the people to take actions on it. So you don't want it forgotten. And then identify any change in the associated risk that we saw for the schedule. So maybe for next year, I've seen an improvement, looks good, you're green. And I'm going to keep going, but I will share an example report if I have a minute. Okay, so additional audit tips. Understand that audits are not a policing exercise. Old school, especially when I started, I mean, auditors were seen as like, people got scared when you came in, you know, they didn't want to deal with an auditor. But honestly, the truth is, like, you're just there to help, right? You're making observations, you're helping them, helping their process improve and ensuring you're compliant to whatever it is the organization thinks you should be doing. Go over the expectations in advance with the auditee because they're comfortable and prepared. And just be courteous and cooperative. People get really nervous sometimes when you audit them. So you just want to make sure that you're cooperative and nice and courteous, just again, so they realize you're not policing them. You can go up to operators and sometimes they look so terrified. And I'm like, no, it's not a big thing. Just like walk me through it. You know, there is a wrong answer, but you know, nothing is that bad. Be an active listener. Encourage honesty from the individuals that you're auditing, because, well, you see two different types of that. If it's a compliance audit, you know, you're really wanting to be kind of careful, not dishonest per se, but careful. But if it's an internal audit, you want them to be as honest as possible, because that's how you're going to get the benefits of the audit. Ask open-ended questions. So try not yes, no, because if someone has an opportunity to just say yes or no, they will. And you want the details. Make sure you're able to defend any major or minor findings objectively, because when you issue that, again, you're aligning that before you leave that audit, so there are no surprises. But you want to make sure you can defend that, whether it's against a standard or their document, whatever it is, you know. Ensure that the auditees understand the requirements of corrective and preventative actions, and, you know, respect the auditee's time. So if you schedule an hour and a half, don't be there for 2 hours. Really kind of, and as you get going, you know how much time you'll need, but be respectful of their time. And I think I have 2 minutes, so I'm going to show you an example report really quick. I'm going to say that was timed really well. Okay.
You're actually scheduled till quarter after per our agenda.
Oh, I thought it was till 7. Okay, cool. Awesome. Then we'll have lots of time for questions.
You have plenty of time.
An hour.
Perfect. Okay. So then I can go through this. That makes me happy.
And then that does not include the question period after that.
Oh, wonderful. Then I'm going to pull up a bunch of stuff for you to see. All right. I can use time. Okay. So this one, this is an example report. So we all should have as a process document management and control. So, and this is a controlled template. So you can see here, it's a global form, this number, I've got my rev and I've got my date. So just general information. Again, I'm keeping track of when it was planned and when I did it. I try to get it accepted on too. So when I send out the report, I mean, this isn't a requirement, but I do it. I'll send them out the report and I'll ask them to give me an approval for it. So I'll document who that was and put the date in there. What is my objective? My objective is to, confirm that we are compliant to the standard for that process, in addition to any customer requirements that are applicable. I'm going to list any of, we call them 8Ds, but you can list them however you want, of corrective actions. There were none for that one. So this comes from that process map that I showed you. Essentially, these are all the clauses that I could tie into document management and control for our standards requirements. And then because we are IATF, any IATF member generally issues what are called customer specific requirements that you are required to adhere to. So we have Volvo. And then our Modine's requirements, which are our internal documents that would apply to this process. So I get all of this ready in advance. And then even sometimes if it's a new person to the organization, I don't know that I've audited them before, I'll actually clip parts of the standard and send it to them just so they're aware of what the requirement is. So they have advance notice to be able to tell me how or show me how they're meeting that requirement. And then I prepare my report in advance as well, just in terms of, I want to make sure. So I write these out. And then these are my talking points with the process owner or interested parties. So I know that this one, I need documented information for the standards compliance. Here's where they are. Here's how they're controlled. QMS documentation. Yeah, there's that. They can show me the process map, walk me through it. They can show me examples of inputs and outputs for that. Creating and updating, so I can show them how it's compliant in terms of how it's secure, how not anyone can revise it, how they're controlled, and they're controlled within a system that we happen to call the Modine business process business framework. And then how are changes made, making sure. So for example, when I first went into our plant, they had all of their files on an internal drive, and they were saying it was controlled because they had a spreadsheet of like what the file names were and what they were and when they were issued. But I was able to pull up any of those files and just edit them. And I said, no, you can't do that. So we moved them over to the Modine business process framework, no big deal. But things like that. And then our record retention, which, hey, we actually had this document. So show me how you meet the requirements of this document for record retention. And how often are we reviewing documents to make sure they're updated? We do that every 3 years. I go over KPIs. This was none at the time. So you can see that's my recommended for improvement. Now, if this vertical had been around a long time, they should know better and know that they need, but it was new because we were separating out from corporate with our own system. So now of course we have a KPI, but at the time we did not. What are my nonconformities within this? List those out, major, minor. What is it? If in your observation, you want to list whatever standards clause or whatever document is related to what your finding is, and then the reasoning for it. And then we have this is where we document our corrective actions for that. You can do it however you want. So yeah, so then I have my recommendations, and then I said, essentially, I'm going to recommend to audit this in the next fiscal year so I can kind of check on these things and see where they're at. So, and they all look like that. So you've got inspections and testing, which looks the same. I did the same thing with the standards, other, what applies, what doesn't apply. And then since we have a minute, I will show you our layered process audit template as well. And I'm sharing these because I created them. So there's nothing proprietary in what I'm showing. So I am adhering to confidentiality. Okay, so yeah, this is the form. Super simple. You want it to be quick. You want to design it that way, right? It should take like no more than 15 minutes for someone to go through and just do this quick audit. But I want to know what area, and it should tie into when they were scheduled. That managing schedules is a thing. They're going to check for all this stuff. I mentioned benefits and safety, right? So one of the things they're checking, are they wearing PPE? Walk around the area, any safety concerns? We use 5S, so we want to make sure those are being followed. Our labels, do those work? Are those correct? Are the work instructions at the station? Can the operator show you where the work instructions are? That one gets interesting, especially if you have low turnover, because you have people that have worked the line forever and they're like, yeah, I just know how to do it. But work instructions are updated frequently, or they need to be aware of, I've got quality alerts in here too. So I need to know that they can show me, you know, if there's a quality alert, where would that be? Show me the work instructions and follow them. Scrap material, do I have clean packaging? Is there any dirty stuff around? Is my stuff calibrated? And then we just take a sample. We don't go through and check at all the calibration. I do that separately at a regular cadence, but they just kind of spot check. And then has testing been completed? For shipping dock, just checking basic things for shipping dock. And warehouse was actually added as a corrective action to another IATF finding, which was related to that example I told you guys about the loose item that wasn't properly labeled. So you can see here my corrective action to the registrar was, hey, we're going to check this once a week, and then management's going to check it once a month. And then we have that 8D because you guys actually did see that's something that we need to be working on. But I mean, that's a common thing people need to work on. And it's not terrible, don't get me wrong. But are there safety issues there? Walking through, are there loose items? And then they actually select one part and trace that part to the warehouse to ensure that it's in the right location. So I've got them putting any comments or observations. They have to initial it. And then because for ease, so these aren't submitted electronically. Somebody takes them out, they're done with a pen. They go into a bin on outside the office, and then they're scanned in. So we have scanned up records for that, but it just makes it really easy. And then I mentioned to you guys that the layer 3 audit is the exact same thing, only management is doing that one. And I'll show you our layer 2, but again, I'm going to tell you that is a little different than you're probably maybe going to see, but we did this as a corrective action as well. And it actually has been really beneficial to improving this for us. I love it. But this is the document audit. So essentially we want to make sure the process flow matches our other documents. We want to look at the control plans to make sure all the information that needs to be on there is on there and is correct. Are special characteristics noted properly? Volvo, I mentioned to you guys, they have a customer specific requirement. That's an annual layout. Is that in there for our Volvo parts? Do we have error proofing activities, which is a requirement for IATF? Are those in the control plan? Our torque values, process flow for the PFEMA, our detection method values consistent? Is everything up to date? And then work instructions. Do updates, do we need updates on the control plan, require updates to the associated documents? And we use a pinpoint system for our standardized work instructions. That's what that is. And then we just kind of list, you know, what needs to be updated. And we actually have a bi-weekly meeting with manufacturing, engineering, and quality, where we go through the reports and then we'll make the updates and corrections to the documents for anything that we found. So that has actually been super beneficial for us as well. What else can I show you guys? I think that's most things. Let me go back to the presentation, make sure I covered everything. I know it's a lot, but I will send out this presentation as well. And then I also have given my email here, happy to answer questions. And I listed these things that I've referenced. This is a really great guideline, the 19011. And then this is the AIG CQI 8-layered process audits guideline, which is great. Even though it's issued by the automotive industry group, it's just a great general guideline for anyone wanting to do layered process audits. I used it as a guideline when creating our program. So, all right, that is a lot of information, I know. And I know that I talk fast, but hopefully I was able to communicate all of that, and hopefully you've got some awesome questions for me. Someone's got to have a question.
I can ask. Thank you very much, Jennifer. That was really thorough. Yeah, I'm getting a feedback from something here, but I have a question on,
Yes.
bias, especially doing internal auditing. I found as being an internal, so I've spent most of my time as a supplier quality engineer, and then I've spent about 3 years as a actual, internal quality engineer. But sometimes as an internal quality engineer, and then also in supplier quality as, with specific suppliers that are that you get well aware of, that you've been working on issues, and you go to then audit them. So you're very familiar with maybe some problem areas. It's very hard to minimize some, bias, trying to, you already kind of have your frame of mind set up in essence, but, how do you battle some of that and try to, stay neutral and try to, like you were saying, keep the benefit of the doubt, and like, not trying to have pre-programmed thoughts on an area and kind of coming from an angle that you're gonna, like, I don't know, like you can almost set people up at different times and so much about different things. But at the same time, you want to be honest as well and try to keep it fair.
So true. So supplier audits are interesting, and I think those do take a little experience. I think you would agree, because when you're going to audit a supplier, that supplier's incentive is to pass that audit, for you to leave happy and not find anything. Versus the audits we were talking about, where we're all internal and we're all a big organization family. So a lot of that, how I've been successful with those, is just on that relationship, right? So if you really have done due diligence to establish a relationship with them, and then put them at ease in advance too. So I always have a call with the supplier in advance, so they can, if it's virtual, I'll turn my camera on, go through kind of what our expectations are. And then when I'm there, and sometimes you can't do that, right? If it's a qualification audit, procurement might have just given you and said, hey, we're thinking about using the supplier, go check them out. And then they're even more on the defense, right? Because there's a lot on the line for them. So the experience comes in because you're able to kind of read through some things that they might say. And then I don't like to call them out on it. I try to target my questions to where I'm getting them to kind of, I don't want to say cornered into, but I'm getting them to respond to what I need them to without accepting the answer that they've given, because I know that there's more to the answer, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Jennifer, can you see the questions?
Oh,
there's
yes,
a
I can.
pile of them.
Oh my goodness, you guys are
Right.
awesome. Thanks. Okay, cool. Let's see what we got. What is the follow-up process from audit from discrepancies to clear? That depends on the organization. Oh, and I like that follow-up to that. Anything different from onshore versus offshore? So having the background working with I've worked mostly international. I'm going to say that I try for there not to be differences between onshore and offshore. It is about kind of communicating and aligning on whatever the discrepancies are. I mean, your timing, there's always the time zone thing if you want to have follow-up meetings. But overall, not any, I'm going to say, major discernible things that would be related to that. In terms of the follow-up process, so and that will depend on who owns it. I have always structured it, because being quality, I am also responsible for the follow-up of those discrepancies to make sure they're cleared out. So whatever your system is, and I've even seen it, like back in the day, it was a spreadsheet tracker, and now we have these great 8D corrective root cause systems. So you want to make sure you've aligned on it, and then determine like who is going to own that, right? Because I've seen it two ways. I've seen it to where I find a finding or a discrepancy, and then I go enter that. And then if I have the ability to add team members or a leader to the team or whatever, I can structure it. But I know that from my audit report, I've had this discrepancy. I've created the required action, work through, and assigned it to someone, and they've got target dates with that. Or sometimes organizations I've seen to say, oh yeah, we'll do that and keep you updated. but then it kind of becomes this email tag of, hey, just wanted to follow up to see if you've, if you followed through on that discrepancy we found in, such and such audit per se. So I do like the approach where we kind of own it, but then we're passing it off to them, but they're accountable. And then John, I think your follow-up too, is there an escalation process during audit based not resolving? Oh, yeah. So I'm so glad you mentioned that actually. So I'm going to answer that first for layered process audits. So you saw in the report that there is an immediate escalation path. So what the process is, and I do the layered process audit training, so they know. But let's say so-and-so finds had the loose item that wasn't labeled, right? So they know that they're supposed to escalate that to the materials manager and copy me. So that goes via email to the immediately, because we don't want to waste too much time. That goes immediately to the materials manager. And then I'm copied. So I'm making sure it's on my issues tracker. So then at the end of every month, or more often if I have time, but at least a minimum of every month, I'm going in to find out what all the open issues still are and going back and following up with that materials manager to say, hey, I didn't get evidence for this to be resolved. But with effective training, they know you're going to hound them about it. So they've gotten better at making sure to close the loop. But in terms of the escalation process, let's say for an internal process, that gets pretty interesting because you are the process owner really is your stakeholder. What I've found is if I'm not getting a response, it's going to show up in my KPIs or it's going to be discussed in that monthly business review. So it'll be flagged out that, hey, I haven't had a response on, I've still got an open corrective action for this. It's been open for a while. And generally there's leadership on that call that will help me be able to follow up. And then it depends on your relationship too. Sometimes you can know who that person, or maybe it's the person that's in charge of the procurement director or whoever it is. And you can, if you're comfortable doing that, escalate it to that level.
Okay, thank you.
Did that answer your questions though?
Yeah, I was interested because I actually I worked did a project offshore, and I actually supplemented the group as the top SQE. So it was interesting dealing with the floor issues and how to deal with the issues, and then have to escalate it off the floor to the management, even beyond the management, because key supplier also with the customer too, and how to get it resolved.
Yeah, so the language thing. So if you are audit, I thought you meant for the corrective actions. I thought it was tied into that, but for sure, the translator stuff gets really interesting. Especially, I'll give you the example. I used to do a lot of social responsibility audits, which require a lot of more intimate type interviews with people. So when you're overseas for any of that type of audit, it becomes particularly interesting because you have a translator. And you want to also, I will say the difference being an auditor from somewhere else going to another country is trust and credibility. So you're walking in, especially when I've done a lot of audits in China, for example, you walk in and they don't immediately trust you. They think, they kind of still today have that policing mentality, like you're going in to get them into trouble sometimes. So I just try to use just kind of that relationship with them. I try to put people at ease. I think that's really important. I try to start, one key thing that actually I've found that's worked is starting off with easy questions. So because then they start feeling really good about it. You don't want to hit them with the hard stuff. So I actually plan the audit to where I know that they're going to be able to shine. Like if I'm going to a supplier, I always, you guys probably do too, but I always have them have, 10, 15 minutes to show off their company. So someone gets to do the little PowerPoint and they talk about how awesome they are. And, so you're getting more comfortable. You've introduced yourself. And then I'll just ask from complexity to easier questions to mixing in with more difficult. And I call it kind of like the audit sandwich, like a feedback sandwich. But so I'll do like the hard stuff in the middle, but I don't want to leave them on that, right? Because I want to
Mhm.
have a good experience. So I end it with some easy stuff too, to make everything feel great. And reassuring, but that's particularly key when you're overseas.
Yeah, I know. I actually worked and lived almost 7 years in Mexico and China. So culture and not to be viewed as they're totally idiots, and that is very key, and in pointing out stuff, and then especially with their management to make sure that, nobody is singled out.
For sure. And when you're talking about Mexico, so I for one project, I opened a ISO 17025 test lab, and they
Mm.
needed it done in 6 months, which was, everyone said it was impossible. But what made it particularly challenging too, just from the language, is the documentation, because
Oh
it's
yeah,
hard, almost impossible to audit a document that's in another language, because you really are relying on someone else and interpreting. So also another tip that I take is, if it takes me an hour to do an audit in the US, that same audit in somewhere else where there's a different language is going to take 2.
that's a good benchmark. Thank you.
Yeah. Unless, for example, as you know, in China, everyone speaks English, so it's less challenging. And Mexico too. But it will take longer either way, because the documentation is going to primarily be in their local language.
Agreed. Thank you.
Yeah. More questions?
How about anybody want to add their own insights into how audits are conducted at their particular company? Put that up against what Jennifer's just talked about in organization of the audits and how they're conducted, and kind of any feedback on, you know, um, some of the things that Jennifer's brought up about how to conduct something versus how they're done at your company, that maybe it's not as friendly, it more is in the policing, audit realm, or, who's willing to share their some experiences.
I can share some of mine, Rob. Yeah, just from the supplier quality, majority of mine has been at, well, I just recently went back there at GE Healthcare. They're headquartered right there, pretty close to you, Jennifer, in Milwaukee area.
I know where they are.
Yeah, and they have a pretty extensive, audit program for our supplier quality program, and we have it pretty standardized as far as the process of setting up the audit with the supplier, and kind of what you touched on, Jennifer, that you set up calls well in advance, identify a date, number one, to conduct that audit. Number two, what are the standards that you're auditing with them? Like, we have some quality agreements between suppliers and GE Healthcare, and then depending on their registration, what they're registered to, if it's 9001 or 13485 for the healthcare division. But we also recognize the IATF 16949 for automotive, or the AS 9100. Understanding that that's all based off ISO 9001, but we recognize that and realize that, hey, if that's what their quality management system's against, but majority of our suppliers were 1345 or 9001. But those would be, like, what are the standards that we're conducting our audit against? And we have a general list of so our audit program is led by a couple leaders, that they also have checklists depending on the commodity of the supplier that you're auditing. And then majority of the auditors would supply those to the suppliers, so that they're aware of the areas that they're going to be conducting the audit. And then there's a lot of preparation that goes along with that. What is the yearly use of this supplier? What are the key parts? What are your key KPIs of that? Or the key issue, parts that are critical. Any past issues, what have been qualified in the recent years. There's a whole sheet that we used to do a bunch of pre-work, and that all had to be loaded up and reviewed by our audit program beforehand. And then you build a schedule and you share it with them, and you get that all set up. This is all done within about 3 to 5 or 6 months ahead of time. And then you have follow-up, coming into the audit just to make sure everything's confirmed. And then once you get there on the audit day, just what you mentioned, Jennifer, it's executed very similar that, you get there and you have the introduction. You basically we have a sheet that we read right off and go right down like, hey, this is how we conduct the audits. This is what we're looking at. We're looking for objectability here, what we see, and we can have dialogue. We set the standard as far as like, hey, at the end of the day, we can have the dialogue. And then, my final word is what the verdict is going to be according to something that's of question. If there's continued more dialogue on it, then we will settle that, outside of this with our sourcing representatives that own the relationship. And I can keep going on, but it was very similar to what you said there, Jennifer. And then we allow them to present exactly what you said about their company to share. And there's a good 15 minutes to a half hour, the opening meeting, we call it, that usually have your key leadership from the supplier that you're at. And they all get a chance to tell us, introduce themselves to me and tell me about them. And then we start off the audit just by doing a quick tour of the facility to familiarize ourselves with it. And it had to be pretty straightforward that, this is the time that we want to cover this in, because, suppliers also have tactics and how they want to prolong that audit. They know the longer they can keep you out of auditing, because in supplier auditing, you have a set amount of time that you're there. And once that's expired, then it's usually done. So if they can hang you up on different things, I know you got to be very focal to the point, cover things and keep it moving along. Otherwise you can get hung up and you run out of time to cover everything. So being aware and being really well prepared. And I think Jennifer covered a lot of those steps through your thorough presentation of what's key about that, because auditing you can get sidetracked in a hurry. But that's a little bit of high level, I guess, from kind of what we did at supplier quality. And it's might have evolved. It's been a couple of years since I was in supplier quality there. So anywho,
I apologize,
any,
you guys. My computer
yeah,
just completely shut down, so I logged in from my other laptop.
shucks.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we
Yeah, I
can.
can hear
Yeah,
you.
we can hear
Yep.
you.
Okay, I really apologize. My other computer just completely broke.
Yeah. Well, I've just put my ASQ PowerPoint back up.
Okay, thank you.
So that was where our my general question to the group was, auditing in your particular business to stimulate some conversation. But I did have going way back in my past questions if you run into the same kind of situation. I was working for an organization that we were going in and again doing supplier quality audits, but we were going in and auditing suppliers to a standard that we knew they were not certified to.
That's fun.
Yeah. We always warned them up front, but then they would volunteer and say, well, come on in anyways. And then they get upset when we would write findings because they did not comply with that particular QMS standard, because it's a very rare one that is used, but there are manufacturing companies that were interested in trying to jump on that bandwagon.
Now, question for you though, was the intent to, I've seen that where you're selecting, sometimes you would select suppliers that you know are not going to be compliant, but your strategy is to develop them.
No, it would basically, I mean, the standard was close enough. In fact, it's ASME NQA1. And it's back in, several decades ago, it was pretty close to, if you were ISO 9000 at the time, you could probably get through it for the most part. But there were certain sections in there that just about every company couldn't meet, but we use that as a, if you can close the gap here, we can put you on our supplier list. You didn't need to be certified, but we wanted to make sure that you had certain practices in place to be able to meet the standard. But we didn't require you to be certified.
That makes sense. For
And-
us, you're supposed to be compliant to IATF, but you can be certified to 9001. So I've seen it all as long as they're, and then even that functional safety and the cybersecurity, we just say that they, in the beginning with the supplier selection process, we say they agree to conform to the requirements rather than requiring a certification.
Yeah. They have to pass an audit, basically.
Yeah, yeah.
So that was our problem, is that because we couldn't depend, well, since no one was really certified to that standard, we basically had to go in and do all these supplier audits to populate our supplier list.
You know what's really interesting about that too is the two sides of a coin that you can be on. So from if you're looking for a supplier and you're going to be a large customer of theirs versus let's say you're purchasing low volume and then you have the same set of requirements. I've seen it so different both sides. You can real quick get them to address corrective actions and be responsive if you've got a lot of volume coming in, but it's hard sometimes to get them to pay attention to you with those findings or corrective actions or however you want to put it. If your volumes are going to be low.
100%.
Yeah. I wrote a SCAR to a supplier when I was supplier quality manager at another company. I wrote a small company a SCAR, and their response to the SCAR was, if you don't like my product, go buy it from somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I've heard similar.
Yeah.
Which then you go to procurement and you're like, what are we gonna do here?
Yeah.
Or if they know that it's a part you can't easily find, or they've got a huge price advantage, they definitely use that.
Yeah.
Which that's a good point you have there, Jennifer. We had a process in place there at GE Healthcare for suppliers and that fit in that category, and they get put on what we call a condition. It's kind of I forget exactly what you call it. It's a conditional status, but it had to be reviewed yearly as far as their risk to the company, and the different layers of management would have to sign off on that, and there would be close monitoring of a supplier because they would hold a key intellectual property of something that was a product that we needed for our obviously product.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
interesting.
I took that lessons learned from that particular experience, and when I built another supplier quality system, I basically got rid of the traditional approved suppliers list, and I then created a supplier approval form that was risk-based on that particular commodity and that supplier. And so what we had was this master analysis sheet that had the evaluation of every single person that we had ever evaluated. And they were then scored as to they were either low, medium, or high risk doing business with. And so that could be quality, on-time delivery, problems with people that were sole sourced, a whole bunch of stuff. But that gave a really nice list to the procurement group so that they would have several suppliers that they could go in and quote from, and they could rank them and say, well, these guys are the low risk. Let's start with them, see what their pricing is. And if they wanted to try to go into the yellow suppliers and see if there was a better deal, but maybe their quality, that we had some quality problems in the past, or maybe they had longer lead times. But in that particular case, when they went in, he got a good quote, but their lead times were shorter. So it gave the company some business flexibility when I did it that way, and procurement really liked that versus having a hard and fast approved suppliers list, which is what they had been used to.
Oh, I like that. We take so an 80/20 approach. Our new CEO is came in and so everything is just kind of 80/20, which is really just sometimes lean. But for supplier quality or even for qualification, we look at the volume, and then we look at ppm to figure out where we're going to allocate our time and effort, so who gets a visit per se. So when we think about suppliers that we're just really not buying a lot and their ppm is, we have a range there, just kind of leaving them alone. They might just get their scorecard or something, but then we really focus on making sure we're paying close attention to ppm of that other majority that of the high volumes. So we 80/20 by our customers as well.
Anybody else like to add anything? Observations, questions? Business stories?
Trying to think of other stories. Oh, one thing we didn't discuss here though, but for internal, so I did when I at Milwaukee Tool. So they did not have a quality system, so I was kind of hired in to create it. And so I didn't want to just implement internal audits, right? Because like nothing was in place. So what I did there was I created a maturity assessment. So I did a model of maturity based on, I had different pillars. And so what I did initially was I went and did a maturity assessment first. And that gave me a lot of insight to try to figure out like where different sites were strong or possibly could use improvement. And that really helped me in going in and starting the internal audit program to get that perspective. And I separately even decided to use the maturity assessment model. It was really great for benchmarking. So I would have like collaborative meetings biannually to where people kind of came into the virtual calls from all over the world, and they would talk about, let's say they were considered a leader in what strategic pillar, and they would talk about kind of the things that they do. But ultimately, I created it for the purpose of they had never done internal audits, so I needed some sort of basis.
Yeah, I've seen those maturity models. Honeywell Aerospace had a pretty extensive one in their developing of their suppliers, and from basically you got nothing to world class. It was huge. I mean, it was one of those spreadsheets that had like 20 or 30 tabs on it.
Oh, see, I made it simple on purpose. I just didn't want to. I didn't. Yeah, but I see for aerospace. Aerospace is one industry that I have avoided. But I love their quality. I do. AS9000 is awesome.
Well, having worked in both that and automotive, I found that when I was in automotive, it was harder.
Oh, did you really? Oh my goodness. Well, so people actually say
Well,
yeah.
I was in it when before the new standard came out, before they adopted PPAPs and APQP and all of that. So they didn't have any of that 20 years ago. And so automotive was so far advanced at that point in time. In fact, Honeywell 20 years ago was actually going out and at least in their supplier quality side, they were actually actively recruiting automotive quality engineers and quality managers in order to develop their supplier quality program.
Wow.
Yeah, it was. I was amazed when I walked in after my years in automotive. It's like, my God, I thought aerospace would be cutting edge, but you're not.
Yeah, no, that is even surprising to me. I have very, very little, almost no aerospace experience, and I've always in my mind perceived it to be because I know what automotive is, and I'm like, if it's worse than that, like I don't know.
Yeah, they've got a few things they've added, but basically the new standard is pretty much aligned with the automotive and a lot of things. But they were not that way 20 years ago.
True. I do know a lot, I do know a lot of people in aerospace and they love it. So,
Yeah. Yeah, actually, you can go even further back. I mean, QS 9000
oh
basically
yeah,
was way beyond what the old AS 91, the AS 9000 was.
that is true.
Wasn't even close.
I am familiar with
Because,
that.
because automotives had their APQP manual with the follow PPAPs, measurement systems analysis, SPC manuals, all that stuff. And aerospace had none of that.
You know, I didn't know that. My assumption was that they had all that the whole time.
No, actually, go all the way back to the 1990s. It was actually Boeing that was even more advanced than the AS 9000 at the time. Um, they had some they called it D1 9000, and it was more advanced than again the AS 9000 of the time. And I still have the giant wall chart um, for it actually said advanced quality systems, and they had this beautiful wall chart on actually doing the same things that automotive was doing under QS, but only Boeing was requiring that.
I remember when I first started going back to World Quality Conferences back in the day, the 90s, Boeing had a huge presence there.
Yeah, I still have all that stuff. All right, if there's no other questions or comments, then I guess thank you, Jennifer, for your presentation.
I have had so much fun. Thank you.
So you can stick around if you want, but at this point, the last few minutes here, we'll just go through some Phoenix section business. And so start off with a reminder to people that there are a couple of ASQ events, one being a joint division conference, which is July 22nd through the 24th. That is a combination of it's 5 divisions and technical communities. So quality management, software, energy and environment, government, and design and construction all are working together to put that conference on. And then September 10th through the 11th is the audit division conference. And their topic for this year is artificial intelligence in auditing.
If you guys are going to go to that, I am the chair for social responsibility on the audit division, and I can tell you in our planning that is going to be a good one.
It definitely sounds it from looking at the agenda. So,
Yeah,
and I love the navigating the new era, because that is for sure with AI coming in more and more to what we're doing in business.
for sure. It's going to be some good stuff.
Um, just point out these. I'm the section chair. David's our secretary. Rishi is our treasurer. And if you go to the my ASQ Phoenix section webpage, you'll find a list and hyperlinks to the various emails to the various members, particularly myself, our voice of the customer chair, program chair, membership chair, secretary, and treasurer, along with our communications chair, or you could just click on the ASQ Phoenix leadership team, and that will come to all of us. We still are looking for some volunteers, even if we're only even though we're halfway through the year, we're still looking for an arrangements coordinator. We're still hoping to have a live meeting at some point later this year. And we're also looking for an Instagram influencer to handle our Instagram account. And if you're interested, you can send an email to the email at the bottom of the screen there. We're always looking for presenters. I think if you're still on there, Mitchell, I think you're still missing one presenter
No, we filled that. John
Okay.
Choi kindly volunteered, and then I had a recommendation from I didn't see him on tonight. Maybe he is on, Charles Cox. I have to present that to the leadership board. There's a colleague of his, Kimberly Watson Hemphill. I've been having quite a bit of dialogue. She is interested in presenting in January, and I need to.
Okay.
Yep. So
Well, so we're
yeah,
starting to work on 26. So if you
we are.
presenters, whatever, get a hold of Mitchell or myself. And then Mitchell can follow up and we'll start working on 26.
Yes. Yeah. Any recommendations, please reach out to myself or Rob or that email that you had up there earlier. I'd greatly appreciate it.
Again, like I said, is we're looking at trying to do some live, at least one live event. So if you could keep your eyes open on our events tab on our webpage. Hopefully we can get the word out. We're trying to make that happen. This is the My ASQ Phoenix section webpage. So events are right up at the top. If you're not familiar with My ASQ, then we also have a job board. We have our library where we put all of our recordings. And that reminds me, I'm going to, let's see here, where is it? I need to